we'll just allow the colleagues in as they come. So good afternoon from a load shedding Gauteng. I don't know what Western Cape and Stellenbosch and Cape Town looks like, but we're having much fun and games in Gauteng with load shedding schedules, changing all the time. Welcome to the second PIB webinar session, and maybe just to recap for those on the line why we're here. So I think what we want to do in the next hour, between myself and my colleagues, we're going to do some introductions now, but we want to take you through some of the inner workings of PASA and create some context for you around what it is that PASA does as an office, as well as a member organization. So hopefully today's session will give you some context into that for the old hats in the room. Some of this might be a duplication, and I also see there's a couple of our students that have done the basic foundational course as well as some of our advanced courses. So this should be easy information for you and maybe just a recap. But we hope it's valuable, and we hope it's going to give you some context as to what it is that makes up PASA and how it operates. Let's quickly just look at the structure of the session as far as orientation goes. I'm going to introduce my colleagues in a minute or so, but to take us through regulation and governance, we have Pia with us today. Pia is going to take us through regulation and governance and where PASA sits in the regulatory landscape and how that operates. And then Marie Smith is going to take us through membership and other recognition. So Marie's going to talk through SOs and TPPs and how those work, very basically, or how PASA works with those organizations. I'm very briefly going to take you through the PASA structures and what PASA structures are. We'll explain a little later, but that is how we organize members and get members together to do the things that we do in the industry, as well as look at our office and how the capabilities inside the PASA office are built. And then Pia is going to finish off with some key focus areas that PASA and the industry currently are working on. And we'll finish off with Q&As. So from a housekeeping point of view, what I'd like to ask you to do is, Nicolette has enabled your chat function. Please use the chat function to ask any of your questions, and then we'll address them when we get to the end. If we have to flip back to some of our slides to demonstrate, then we'd be happy to do so. The reason we do that is sometimes we've seen that the questions that come up on the first couple of slides get answered in the latter part of the presentation. So we want to give you an opportunity to listen through those, but please pop them in and we'll answer those at the end of the session. Do we have any questions before we start? Nothing. Thank you for drawing the curtain, Nicolette. So from an introductions point of view, my name is Letitia Mens. I look after industry capacity building at PASA. Been in the payments space for about 17 years, I counted yesterday, but at PASA for coming up 11 years now. With me, we have Pia Kutsia, who's our Chief Legal Officer and probably known to everyone on the list. Pia's been with PASA for a very, very long time. And then also on screen in real form, as well as cartoon form on the presentation, is Marie Smith. Marie looks after membership, authorizations and registrations. Thank you for joining us, colleagues. Alrighty, so I think that is it from my side. Before I hand over to Pia, maybe what we should also just say is that we will make this presentation available. Nicolette will send it out to you. We are also recording the session, and we have another session on the 30th that you might also received a link for. That session is a repeat of the session. So if you feel that you want to listen to our story again, you are more than welcome to join us in that session, but it will be exactly the same agenda. After the session on the 30th, which is our last session, we will make a recording available of one of the sessions. So the session that we feel we articulated the best. We will make recordings available and we will let you know where that recording is if you want to re-listen or maybe you want to share with some of your colleagues. With that, thank you, Pia. Over to you.
Thank you, Letitia. So I don't know whether it's good or bad for me being so very, very long with PASA. I think from my perspective, yes, I have been enjoying my time at PASA and still enjoying it and looking forward. And this is done in the context of establishing a future PIB. I have seen a couple of colleagues that I've worked very closely with and who are also involved in the PIB process. So I think that the purpose of this is to provide context so that we understand where we are at with regards to an industry body and where should we go with, what should we cover. And this is just helpful, you know, just the context. Now, PASA's formation started early in 1990s. It was an initiative between the banking industry and the Reserve Bank. I think discussions started in 1994, and ultimately many and most of you will know there was a blue book, which was the first policy paper issued by the SARB. And that blue book is still the Bible of principles, payments principles today. I think the blue book was issued in 94. PASA was then established as, at that point in time, with the view of becoming the payment system management body referred to in what we currently know in the Payment System Management Payment System Act. So PASA was established in 96, still an organization of members, and with the view of aligning with the Act. Now, membership was compulsory, so if you participated in clearing and settlement, it was compulsory. Now, the Act was promulgated in 98, and then PASA was subsequently recognized by the Reserve Bank as a payment system management body in 99. Now, what is a payment system management body? It is, in essence, what you see in the Act is the body that organizes, manages, and regulates the participation of its members in the payment system. It is an extension to an extent of the SARB, because if you read Section 3 of the Act, it says PASA assists the SARB in the discharge of their responsibilities. So quite unique type of body. You have to look at other international bodies to find out more about the different type of bodies that you have. Trade associations, lobby bodies, regulatory bodies, self-regulatory organizations, and you get all those nuances on payment associations worldwide. Now, PASA in the NPS Act has to have a constitution. It says the constitution and its rules must be fair, transparent, and equitable. And when issuing rules, we must fairly represent the interests of its members. Now, this is what you will see in the PASA Constitution: a purpose, a vision, and a mission. And mainly the purpose of PASA, as we see it in the Constitution, is to exist to facilitate the circulation of money in the interest of economic development of South Africa. And then you can read the others as well. It is self-explanatory. Thank you, Nicolette. Now, what is quite interesting about this slide is linked to the vision, mission, and objectives of PASA, we have linked the following goals. In actual fact, this is not different to policy objectives. If you understand the Financial Sector Regulation Act, the COFI Bill, the NPS Act, and you look at some of those goals that we're talking about, financial inclusion is definitely in the scope of the SARB as well as the FECA. If you talk about access to the payment system, it's also within scope. Interoperability is a core policy objective of the SARB in the payment system. And each and every one of those goals that we list there is in actual fact a goal of the current PASA. And without knowing it, in 2009, when we introduced these goals into our constitution, we didn't know that the Financial Sector Regulation Act would provide for financial stability, safety and soundness of financial institutions, consumer protection. And consumer protection you also see in the CPA, the Consumer Protection Act, as well as in the COFI Bill. So it was just coincidence that there are so many overlaps with current regulatory environment. Thank you, Nicolette. Now, in essence, what are we saying? PASA was established and is overseen by the Reserve Bank since '96, although more closely, formally, since '99, when PASA was recognized as a payment system management body. Currently, we have 32 members, and we have two, I think three, I'm not too sure, Marie will rectify that figure there, 2 or 3 designated clearing system participants who are non-banks but designated by the SARB because they are involved in clearing. Then we have an executive office, management, as you know it. We are governed by a board called PASA Council, and council is comprised of member representatives. Now, keep in mind, if we talk about the future PIB, there will be member representatives as well as independent board members, and that's what we currently have, 3 of them, Sydney, Herman Singh, and Ingrid Goodspeed. And then, of course, we have ex officio councillors. The spelling I see there is incorrect. Ex officio councillors, being the CEO's ex officio, and the SARB is also sitting on the board of the council. And then what we do is we manage through governance, and the 3 terms there is essentially speaking to governance, structures, processes, and ethical values. And we'll share with you the structures that we have in place. So ultimately, the payment system is a national asset. It is in the interest of South Africa that it is safe and efficient, whatever we develop as payment systems. We see it's a common critical asset for South Africa, for any country. If you do not have a payment system, your economy will suffer. So also another role is to stimulate, encourage, and facilitate the development of new infrastructure. And we talk about innovation. We are talking about, for instance, a good example is the RPP system being collectively developed by the industry, PASA, and Banks of Africa. Now, if we talk about regulation, there is most certainly direct regulation and a regulatory framework. Now, one of the cornerstones of any industry, and I regard this as good corporate governance and a sound legal framework. That's why I'm sitting in those areas. So we need a legal foundation for the payment system in South Africa, starting with the South African Reserve Bank Act. In Section 10, it refers to and it empowers the SARB to regulate and oversee the payment system. It's a one-liner and finish and climb, but in '98, the National Payment System Act was promulgated to provide more powers and more clear powers to the Reserve Bank to establish a payment system management body, to talk about the members, the safety and efficiency of the payment system. And it also allows the SARB to issue directives. Now, for many, many years, the SARB used to issue position papers, and they still do it, but the focus is not that much on position papers, because a position paper is exactly that. It's only a position. A directive is binding on any participant, as you will read from the National Payment System Act. Now, this spills over to the PASA environment, where the NPS Act refers to the PASA constitution or founding document, which must be fair, equitable, transparent. And we have compiled the constitution. We've signed it off through our members. It was presented to the SARB and they approved our constitution. And still, if we have amendments to the constitution from time to time, we have to take it back to the SARB for approval because of the close relationship and because PASA's that recognized payment system management body to assist the SARB in the discharge of their responsibilities. Let me just test. I'm flowing over these concepts and so on. If there are any questions, I can take them on the go. Then in the PASA environment, of course, in that closer immediate direct environment, we also have to have a clear regulatory and sound legal framework. Now, our legal framework is comprised of the PASA Constitution, PASA policies such as sorted source, stakeholder, we have a stakeholder, we have a compliance, and more specifically compliance enforcement, and we have a competition policy. Now those are aimed at governing and managing our members as they participate in the payment system. We do also not issue that many position papers. PASA structures are mandated and they make decisions. These decisions are binding on members. For instance, if PASA Council would make a decision within their mandate as the governing body of PASA, that decision would be binding on members. Then furthermore, we talk about PCH agreements. We took, and I think this is the focus as well, that the PCH clearing rules. We have other rules, settlement rules, and debit order abuse rules, but also the PCH clearing rules is the critical aspect, and that's the core thing of PASA, the management of payment systems. That is core to a payment system management body. Whatever we do in future, it would be core to that body as well. And of course, there are service levels agreements. If your members enter into a service with a PCH system operator or a system operator, we have service level agreements as well. Now, this is just a high level overview of the regulatory environment. On the left-hand side, you have the regulator, and the right-hand side, you have the legislation. So you can just see, and those are mainly, and I would venture to say direct regulation applicable to PASA, to its members, to the payment system, Reserve Bank Act, the Financial Sector Regulation Act for sure, Banks Act, Mutual Banks Act, Cooperative Banks Act, National, and that's contained also in the National Payment System Act. Any bank, mutual bank, cooperative bank, designated clearing system participant is directly governed by the National Payment System Act and may become members of PASA once they clear. If they clear, they must, of course. Then FICA is applicable, Companies Act, Insolvency Act, Competition Act, and that is applicable on a day-to-day basis. National Credit Act, if you look at debit order abuse discussions, the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act would only apply in the sense that if a body performs a public function in issuing rules, and those rules will have a direct impact on a stakeholder. Now, protection of personal information, as we know, anti-terrorism, AML, proceeds of crime, POCTA, POCA, and those pieces of legislation, they play out. And then also Consumer Protection Act and the COFI bill that is being drafted and will be tabled at Parliament. I think a final round of consultation will be initiated at the end of the year. Now, at the left-hand side, you see the regulators involved, SIPC, ICASA, Gambling Board, and incidentally, if you look at the Gambling Act, just to use an example, there was a provision, still is, if you process a transaction and you know the proceeds of that is against the provisions of the Gambling Act, then you as an entity, and that's not only applicable to banks, so in the value chain, it could be a system operator, TPP, it could even be an M&O for that matter. Then you have to, and you are subject to the provisions of the Gambling Board and the Gambling Act. Then we go to, again, this is just a confirmation of primary payments regulation. I'm not going to repeat all of those because I've dealt with this. As you know, the NPS Act is not currently a financial regulation, as for instance, the COFI bill will be, the Consumer Protection Act and other pieces of legislation. But the NPS Act in future will fall under the Financial Sector Regulation Act. COFI bill I dealt with, Financial Intelligence Center Act also, and what we see there, identification of the proceeds of unlawful activities, the combat of money laundering and financing of terrorists and related activities through payments. So that is primary regulation in our world and as we apply it on a daily basis. Then other regulation or legislation, and again, we have to unpack this, what is directly and what is indirectly applicable in the PASA environment. But if you look at the bank's compliance, one person once said more than 300 pieces of legislation applied to banks in their compliance. Now that ranges from deposit taking to credit provision and so on, including payments and so on, AML and those provisions. This is other pieces of regulation or legislation. As we can see it, and we can quickly go through it: protection of personal information, promotion of access to information, Competition Act, National Credit Act, and others governing FATF and anti-money laundering activities. So if we look at the point of departure in the National Payment System Act, we know an entity cannot process if you process from two lines, a line of credit or a line of deposit. If you take deposits, you have to be a bank. And that's why we have the Banks Act. There's the second point. And that's prudential regulation that will apply to you. That's not within the remit of PASA. That's within the remit of the Prudential Authority. And then these entities like the banks, the Post Bank, Cooperative, Mutual Bank, and international banks are all eligible to become members of PASA if they clear. So the moment they are one of those licensed as per the Prudential Authority, then they have the right to become a member of PASA. Thank you, Nicolette. So now you can see how it plays out. National regulation that impacts on the PASA regulatory framework, and more directly, it goes down to the National Payment System Act, the PASA Constitution, policies, and so on. So in our Constitution, we reference national regulation and compliance with such regulation. So members are subject thereto. It's not for PASA to enforce compliance, but as a code of conduct, our members commit to complying with every piece of legislation in South Africa. Now, I shared with you the governance, the structures, the processes, the ethical values, and what you see here is, again, in the national payment system, and this question will definitely come up. It has been discussed in the PIB discussions. So what do we serve? If we act as a body, that PIB, is it going to serve the interest of the NPS, or is it going to serve the interest of the organization? Now, all these things play out in governance. It is intermingled with regulation, the SARP Act, the NPS Act, and what you see there, again, is just a reflection of the regulatory framework, but now we start talking about interests of the NPS. Now, just as a principle, any piece of legislation is preceded by policy objectives. If you cannot meet policy objectives, there's no purpose for that piece of legislation. You have to improve the environment, and by way of introducing legislation, you meet those policy objectives. This also talks about the members of PASA, and we need to clarify that if we talk about PCH system operators, the PSOs that you see there, and the SOs, they are not members of PASA. But the Act provides that PASA will authorize them in terms of criteria approved by the SARP. Nicolette. Another picture, another diagram of how the regulatory and oversight framework fits into the PASA environment. I'm not going to repeat it again in the interest of time. And I think this is the interesting one. So again, this morning at a session, PIB session, it was a design team session. It was discussed that so the board of the future PIB and in terms of King 4 and the Companies Act, a board member has a fiduciary responsibility. That responsibility is owed towards the entity, the company, the PIB, PASA. Now, that's quite interesting. If you look at the PASA constitution, you will see PASA councillors, whether they are appointed by members or appointed independently, they have to act in the best interest of PASA, but even more so in the best interest of the NPS. And that is a deviation from the general principle that you act in the best interest of your company, and your fiduciary duty lies exactly there. It is quite interesting, and that makes it challenging in the PASA environment and the future PIB. And I think that discussions as they play out at this point shows that there's a level of understanding that still needs to be obtained. Now, in PASA, we know the payment system is a national asset. We know we have to align with whatever the Reserve Bank prescribes, their policy objectives, but not only their policy objectives. We know the Financial Sector Conduct Authority has policy objectives as well. Financial inclusion, safety and efficiency of the payment system, interoperability. So you have to align with those. Then there's a lot of NPS stakeholders. They are users. They are user associations. And those are stakeholders of the PIB, the stakeholders of PASA. In King 4, there's in actual fact almost legislative demand. King 4 is not compulsory, but King 4 says you will act in the interest of PASA, the interest of the employees. And then there are members, and you have to act in the interest of members. The NPS Act, for instance, says whenever you issue a rule, you will do it in order to serve the NPS, but while doing so, you must fairly represent the interests of your members. Now, you can see the different forces playing out, interests playing out, and this is exactly what is going to play out in the future PIB. Nicolette. Now we're getting to governance. Governance for me, in essence, in a one-liner, is about the processes we follow. Do we follow due process? Do we consult wherever necessary? Do we have the structures? And if we talk about the structure, we talk about the committee, a collection of members or interested parties getting together with a proper mandate to report on, with responsibility and accountability, with a line of reporting. Now, if you have all those things in place and you ensure effective outcomes of the organization, decisions are made effectively, then you are serving good corporate governance. Now, in the PASA environment, we have the PASA Council as the governing body. They have the mandate in terms of the Constitution to establish board committees, and you can see those committees there, the Audit Committee, the REMCO, the NIC Nomination Induction, and I said, no, the Risk Committee as well. However, there are operational committees, the PCHPGs, the strategy committees, the SME committees such as the Legal Committee, the Competition Committee, and all those committees assist PASA Council to achieve their strategic objectives. But they have a constitution. Each of those committees has a constitution. They have delegated power. They make decisions in terms of good due processes, corporate processes, and governance processes to get to a decision which they can enforce. Now, you can also see there are stakeholder forums, and we have a legal stakeholder, a strategy stakeholder forums, and we engage generally with the consumers, the users out there. I think suffice to stop at this point in time, but the message is you have to have proper structures in place. They have to be accountable with a proper mandate and reporting line back to the governing body going forward. Now, PIB, there will be different structures. It's not going to be exactly the same, but again, I repeat this, it's core to the business of a payments association in any country to manage and look at the safety and efficiency, interoperability of that payment system. Nicolette. So I think important, am I still within time, Letitia? Yeah, 10 minutes to go now.
You have about 5.
Okay, so PASA Council, governing body, they have to act collectively, independently. They have to, as a collective, and each individual has to act as an independent person with an unfettered discretion when they exercise their discretion and their duties within PASA Council. So they are subject to a fiduciary duty, and that was it's hugely responsible or important that we have that in the future body as well, a body that is accountable for what they do in the payment system and for that body. So mainly a body or governing body looks at governance, strategy, risk, compliance. Those are the critical issues that they would look at. Of course, there are many other issues, but in the PASA, the business is a payment system. The payment system has to be managed effectively, and we have to get decisions. We have to innovate. We have to look at all those elements that impact the payment system. Not going to waste time on any of those. That is the composition of council at this point in time. So 4 from the big banks, as you can see on the right hand side, top row, 3 from the smaller banks, 3 independents, the CEO and the Reserve Bank, making up for 12 councillors. Those are the council committees, and they have their mandates in terms of that. Marie will talk to you about the compliance enforcement and the compliance function within PASA. Now, again, the role of the councillor is to act independently, whether you are appointed by your member or independently by, or you are a pure independent councillor, you have to act in the interest of the NPS with a fiduciary responsibility. Then the question is, what is the difference between the role of a councillor? Councillor would act with a fiduciary responsibility, but when you act in a forum of the PIB in PASA, you are allowed to come with a member view. Therefore, they are voting, there are proper procedures, there's escalation from the committee to PASA Council and even to the Reserve Bank, ultimately, if you feel you are still aggrieved. So there's a clear mandate to the committees to bring a member interest to that committee and to vote on those interests. So it's not ignored in that perspective. But a councillor, once that issue goes to PASA Council, there is a fiduciary responsibility not to look at the single interest, but at the collective interest. Not to look at the single interest, but the NPS interest. So those things are playing out in our structures. And for years, this has been working very well because of proper governance, because of accountability, because of escalation up to the SOP. And I must say, in the many, many years, as Letitia said, I can only recall 2 or 3 incidents that were escalated to the Reserve Bank, and many of these instances, if not all, the SARB supported the final decision of PASA. Nicolette. Now, again, we have a different type of people we appoint, representatives to committee. We have a responsible senior officer, that's the most senior person in the bank on payments. That was a requirement by the SARB to have such person. We are providing for such person and his appointment in terms of our constitution. But again, there's a clear difference in the role they perform. They represent a bank view, a member view, a non-bank view, or whatever they do, because the non-banks could also be members, as you know. But the councillor is not acting in the interest of the member, but in the interest of the NPS. Thank you, Nicolette. Yeah, drivers, I think I'm running out of time, colleagues, but I'm going to, and you can see these things now, as I've seen the colleagues involved in this meeting or this presentation, you are aware of the main drivers currently. Policy objectives, that's clear. Financial stability, safety and soundness of financial institutions, consumer protection, interoperable access to the payment system. These are policy objectives driven by our regulators, that spills over in regulation. That's why we're sitting with the Financial Sector Regulation Act, the COFI bill, the MPS Act revision or the bill. So that they are drivers for change in our environment. Then, of course, technology, innovation, and those points that we make there, artificial intelligence, convergence, blockchain, fintechs, instant payments, these things cannot be ignored. They add a level of stress on the payment system, saying, but we can provide a function more efficiently, better in terms of new technology. So innovation and strategy is one of the drivers, technology. And of course, although we say the biggest risk lies in settlement in the payment system, we know from a consumer perspective, if money is taken from your account without your mandate, it's a huge impact. And therefore, the consumer trust, safety, protection is so important. What we have seen in one of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority's position papers circulated quite recently on open banking. If the consumer does not have trust in the payment system, that will have a knock-on effect, and ultimately it will result in the impact on financial stability, where you could sit with a country that is not financially stable because of consumer distrust in the payment system. So just keep these things in mind. Colleagues, I have to stop and pass it on to the baton on to Marie. But please post your questions and we can deal those by way of chat box or afterwards. Thank you, Letitia, and over to you, Marie.
Thanks, Pia. I think we're going to give over to Marie immediately. Thank you, Marie.
Thanks, Letitia. Thanks, Pia, for the very nice introduction. I think it sets the foundation very nicely for the conversation that we're going to have now. And I see some of the questions already being asked in the chat box, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now, is membership of PASA and other designations that can be conferred by PASA on entities. So like Pia has indicated, the starting point for this conversation has to be the National Payment System Act. And what that says is it clearly tells us in Section 3 who can be a member of PASA. And what the Act says at this point in time is that any type of bank, you can see there, it can be a mutual bank, cooperative bank, so any type of bank, and then entities who have specifically been designated by the Reserve Bank to participate in clearing. Those two types of entity can be a member of PASA. Now, if you want to clear, in other words, if you want to participate in the transmission of payments instructions in the centralized system, then you have to be a member of PASA, bearing in mind that to do that, you have to then either be a bank or you have to be designated. So following from clearing, so clearing is of course the one part of a payment. The second part of a payment is the settlement, and that is the actual movement of funds in the books of the Reserve Bank. And if you want to settle, you have to be a bank. So there we are not even talking about anybody else, no designation, no non-bank entity. At this stage in time, only banks may participate in settlement. Section 3.4. Okay. That doesn't mean that there aren't other entities out there who aren't banks and who aren't designated, but who play a very important role in South Africa's payments ecosystem. Now, there are quite a few different business models out there, quite a vast number of entities who do different things with respect to payments. But at this stage, the Reserve Bank has issued 2 directives, which focus on 2 very specific type of non-bank payment service providers. And the directives themselves then specify what is required from these types of players. Now, if you are neither a T-P-P nor an ESO, and we'll discuss both of these designations now, you may still render a service with respect to payments, but you might not conform to that definition, and that would place you outside of the directive. So bear in mind as we have these discussions that you might be neither of these, but still participate in the payment system in some capacity that is not currently regulated or contained in either the Act or the directives. So the first directive that the SARB issued in 2007 was aimed at governing what the Act terms and what the directive terms third-party payments providers, or T-P-Ps for short. Now, for those of you who've spent some time in payments, you'll quickly see we love our acronyms, and this is absolutely no exception. So a T-P-P is an entity who receives money, or so we can see it's the funds, they actually receive funds, the proceeds of a payment instruction, for onward payment to the ultimate beneficiary. I've highlighted the term money due there, and that's very important. The reason I've done this is to indicate to you that the way in which this directive is to be interpreted is that it applies only in those instances in which the money is actually due to the beneficiary. In other words, there is some sort of underlying reason why this beneficiary must be paid. So either the payer has purchased something from the beneficiary, or the beneficiary has rendered a service to the payer, but their money must be due. So we are not talking here about donations or about remittances. We are actually talking about the settlement of an obligation. A T-P-P model can follow one of two constructs. The first one is one payer to multiple beneficiaries, as you will see there on the left-hand side of the screen. A very good example of something like that is a payroll administrator, where a company would pay the payroll administrator a sum of money and give the payroll administrator a file to say which of the employees should get what, and the payroll administration company then pays each of the employees their salary that is due to them. The opposite side of the coin, we've got many payers who need to pay a single beneficiary, and a very good example of that, of course, is if we go to a retailer and pay our municipal bills. In that case, each one of the payers, meaning you and I, we pay the T-P-P, who is the retailer, and the beneficiary in this scenario would be the municipality. So that is in a nutshell what a T-P-P does. Very important to remember that the directive contemplates the T-P-P as being an agent. In other words, depending on the model that we're talking about, either the payer or the beneficiary, as the case may be, needs to appoint the T-P-P as their agent. There needs to be a contract in place with the T-P-P. Okay. As we've said, T-P-Ps are governed under SARB Directive 1 of 2007, which is an outflow of the Act. And what it says is that a T-P-P, so anybody who conducts this business as a regular feature of the business, in other words, it's your business as usual, you must inform the bank where you've got this account that you're using for these purposes, and that bank in turn approaches PASA and registers the T-P-P. That word is very important. Sorry, let's just go back to the previous slide. A T-P-P is registered. What that conveys to you is that there's no discretion on the side of PASA as to whether or not the T-P-P will be registered. That entirely resides with the sponsoring bank. So the bank will apply its mind. It will think about its risk appetite, the risk profile of the T-P-P in question, and ultimately the bank will make that decision. Then they will make the application to PASA to register this entity, and PASA will do certain checks and do certain validations around the information that has been provided to us, but there's no discretion whatsoever. If we receive confirmation from the bank that the bank wishes to register the entity, that entity will be registered. So it's a record that we keep at the end of the day, much more than it is a license or anything else. Okay, let's move to the next. Thanks, Nix. So we've spoken about T-P-Ps who handle funds or money. Now the converse of that, if we think about clearing, settlement, T-P-P deals with the funds, which is very close to settlement. ESO deals with the transmission of the payment instruction. Payments instruction, that is the technical message that flows. Doesn't have anything to do with money. In fact, what the ESO directive says is that an ESO may not touch funds. An ESO is there purely to transmit the payments message, so the payments instruction, to the next point in the transactional value chain. Thanks, Nix. You can move on. ESOs are governed under this other directive, second directive of 2007. And what that directive says is that if I am conducting the business of an ESO and I've got 2 or more clients, in other words, you can already see we're talking about thresholds here. and I exceed certain volume and value thresholds. Those at present are 10,000 transactions per month and or 10 million rand in value. Then I must apply for authorization as a system operator. So below those thresholds, and if I've only got the one client, I don't meet the definition of an SO, and I don't meet the threshold, so I don't have to apply. It's entirely my discretion. But the moment that I reach these thresholds, I have to apply for authorization. Now, how I do that, I do an application to PASA. That I do directly because an SO does not have a sponsoring bank. We are not dealing with funds here, so an SO can render this service to anybody, to banks, to merchants, and so there's no sponsoring bank. The SO approaches PASA directly, does the application. PASA then assesses the SO against the system operator criteria. As Pierre has indicated earlier, that document is a PASA document, but the criteria ultimately are approved by the Reserve Bank to say these are the criteria that an SO must meet in order to be authorized. So PASA will assess the application against the SO criteria, and if the SO meets the criteria, authorization will be granted to the SO and a certificate issued. And that authorization is renewed on an annual basis. So annually the SO has to again apply for reauthorization. Next, one slide on. So we spoke a little bit about TPPs, SOs, but there's also another type of entity called a payment clearinghouse system operator. Now, as the name suggests, we are dealing with somebody who transmits payments instructions here. The difference being that this particular type of entity has been appointed as the central switch, if you will, the central hub between all of the different participants in a payment clearinghouse. So if we deal with the banks and the designated clearing system participants who all participate in a particular payment system, in a particular PCH, they will all connect to the same centralized hub, and that hub will then transmit the instructions between them, and at the end of the day, send the settlement messages to SAMOS at the Reserve Bank so that the funds can move in the books of the Reserve Bank and settlement can be effected. Today, so next, maybe move one slide on. Thanks. So today we've got 4 payment clearinghouse system operators. These are BankServe, Visa, MasterCard, and Straight, and not all of them participate in all of the PCHs. Then we've got about 281 registered third-party payments providers. That figure changes almost on a monthly basis as we get more applications and as certain entities cease being third-party payments providers. About 96 authorized system operators and 32 members of PASA. Now, Pierre spoke to you a little bit about designation. Of that figure, the 32 PASA members, 2 of them are currently designated entities, Postbank and Diners Club South Africa. However, since designation was for the first time taken up in the Act, I think in 2007 when the Act was amended, we had for a long time, there were no new applications for designation. And then about 3 years ago, we started seeing a couple of new applications. So even though we currently only have 2 PASA members who are designated, there are a few more entities who have received designation from the Reserve Bank and will become members of PASA in the very near future. All right, that brings us to the end of membership, authorization and registration. And Letitia, you can take over again. If there are any questions, please pop them in the chat or ask them at the end of the session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marie. I think between you and Pierre, you've done a fabulous job because we have no questions yet. But as Marie says, please pop those questions there. We have a question. Thank you. We'll talk about those now. All right, so, I think this is a familiar slide to this audience. Pierre actually spoke through the slide pretty well. What I wanted to demonstrate with this really was just to set up for some of the next slides that we're going to go over. And as I said, the section is going to talk about how PASA organizes the industry to get to the things that we do. So the projects and the decisions and fulfill our duties as PASA. So Pierre would have told you about all the committees. What I want to point out is just, as you can see, there are different groupings or different types of committees. If we have a look at the top of the slide, the dark blue blocks, we have some PASA council subcommittees, and those committees really serve as a sounding board and informing PASA council to make certain decisions, and those individuals are experts in whatever the areas of the committee. And then we have committees that PASA EXO, so PASA the office, our office that we look after directly as delegated down. Those are PCHPGs, and we had some questions around PCHPGs. The PCHPG, the easiest way to explain that, it equates to an operational or functional committee, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then we have strategy committees on the other side that look after strategy, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we have operational committees, we have strategy committees, and then at the bottom we have SME committees, the likes of legal and our risk committee and our competition committee. We call them SME committees because we call all the SMEs from our members to serve on those committees. Not all of them are standing committees. Some of them meet regularly and some of them only meet when we need them to talk about something specific. For example, the competition committee, if we have any type of competition question coming from any of the above structures, would go to the competition committee. They act as a consultation forum for whatever we need to do in our structures. And then also as part of the strategy function, our strategy team also then looks after a couple of stakeholder forums that inform our strategy forums. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Nix, and then we can talk about what those committees mean, right? So now that you've seen the overarching picture, we have one of these pictures for each of our payment systems. Now we do this to demonstrate that we have committees that with specialists in separate payment systems that look after those payment systems. So the card people in the organizations would represent their banks and look after the card payment systems. And all of these committees are structured, or all of these payment systems are structured in a certain way. So for committees to look after that payment system, we have a group of people who look after the strategic side of the payment system. In this instance, that would be our card strategy committee, and typically those would be heads of card or very senior representatives in the card business of a bank, in most instances in our members, that would sit together and that would provide direction in terms of where the card payment system should go from an interoperable point of view. Granted that all of the members have their own things that they do inside their organizations in the card business, for instance, but in this committee, the mandate of those forum members are to look at the greater NPS and how we make that payment system better from a strategic point of view. They look at tactical information, and they kind of shape and steer conversations and make decisions on things that need to be implemented in the industry. Maybe some examples of that to make it practical are most recently the QR project that PASA is busy working on, that had to go through the card strategy forum to make a decision that this is something that we can look after or look at from a collective point of view. Not in the card space, but in the electronic space, the rapid payments program, for example, has been through the electronic payments strategy committee to look after. A couple of years back, the implementation of 3D Secure or PCI DSS. Those decisions are all decisions that are made by the card strategy forum to give steer to where we want to take the payment system in the future. Supported by that, we have a card PCHPG. And just to reiterate, PCH is a payment clearing house, and then PG is a participant group. So a group of people getting together. Those are our operational people, and our card PCHPGs takes care of day-to-day functionality and effectiveness of the payment system. So they look at how well the payment system is working. They raise incidents. If the payment system isn't working well, they fix those incidents. And they generally look at the health of the payment system. They do that, for example, by ways of implementing new rules, updating rules where necessary. They make procedural decisions on things that needs to be done on systems that affect the payment system as a whole. For example, our SQS systems where disputes and incidents are raised. And they also look at implementing technical solutions to improve the efficiency of the payment systems. They in turn are supported by subcommittees looking at rules. Specifically, if you can see, there's a rules subcommittee or there's an incident subcommittee, and those forums again are populated by specialists in those fields. So it wouldn't all be the same people. It's important that we pull people from our members that are specialists in their different fields to make those decisions. Our subcommittees do not have decision-making power. They merely inform decisions made by our CARD PCH-PG, who acts as the main forum for operational and functional efficiency of the payment system. For each of the payment systems then in turn, we also have a committee that looks after risk management, which is quite self-explanatory, but it's a very important role to have, and we pull risk experts from our members to look at that. The risk subcommittee also informs decisions and direction both for the CARD strategy committee as well as our CARD PCH-PG. So risk-related stuff, we would look at the risk people to inform what we need to do in the other committees. And then, as I said, we have a stakeholder forum, in this instance, the CARD stakeholder forum, and that is the forum where not only members attend, we also have non-members. So those are the forums that we pull our non-member colleagues into, and we talk about things that impact the broader payment system, and we get guidance from those colleagues. Those are really brilliant conversations to be part of. Thank you, Nick. Let's quickly go to the next one. So you will see a similar structure for each of the payment systems, as I already alluded to. This is the low-value electronic payment system. So maybe what I should quickly just say, which I should have at the start. So we have our card payment system, we have our low-value electronic payment system, so all other low-value payments that are non-card. And then we look at high value and we look at settlement. So an example of a low value electronic payment would be a debit order in EFT debits, or an internet payment in EFT credits, or a real-time payment in RTC, not checks anymore. All those payment systems are taken kind of together in one picture, as you can see, and we have a strategy committee that looks after those payment systems from a strategic direction point of view, as I explained before. Same as the card one, just for electronic, low-value electronic payments. We then have two operational forums, one focusing on the debits side of electronic, low-value electronic payments, and one on the credits side. So on the one side, you'll see we have EFT debits and ADO and ADO and AC, so all the debit pool transactions. And on the other side, we have low-value credits, so all the credit push transactions, our normal internet payments, salary payments, and RTC. Again, supported by subcommittees, all specialists in the same field. Risk management, we have a risk committee, again, supporting both the structures and making recommendations and decisions about risk stuff. And then we have a stakeholder forum where we pull non-stakeholders in the electronic payment system space. So on the card side, we would have retailers and the SARPIF guys and the EFA guys and the guys that play in that space. From a non-member point of view, we pull in. On the electronic side, we would have the PSSF and the ASISA guys and the guys that play in that space that we pull into the stakeholder forum. Thank you, Nix. On the high value side, I think Pia is pointing out in the chat, payment systems where value of transactions is lower than 5 million. So when we talk about low value, thank you, Pia. When we talk about low value, transactions below 5 million. The slide that you see on the screen, high value, are transactions above 5 million. That follows a little bit of a different route than normal clearing and settlement for retail payments. Exactly the same structure, nothing that you haven't seen on the previous slides. We have a strategy committee, we have functional and operational committees. Again, the operational committees are logically split by function. So we have the electronic securities in one forum, and then we have cash in another forum, and we have immediate settlement. So those SWIFT transactions that go between the banks directly, those are immediate settlement transactions in one forum. And I think if we just look at that, it makes perfect sense that we have like for like type transactions being looked after in the same forum. Again, we have a rules subcommittee in the space that looks after rules, and they inform decisions by all three of those forums. Prior to last year, we had a couple of rules subcommittees for those, and we've been consolidating those and making it cleaner and easier for representatives to attend the meetings, and the processes just become a little bit more streamlined. We have a risk committee looking after the high value space, and then relatively new still in the space is our high value stakeholder forum where we would again pull non-member participants into those forums. Thank you, Nix. As I then said, we have a group of committees or a group of people that look after settlement, particularly for day-to-day matters, making sure that our settlement happens properly. That is the settlement system piece, PG, and we also have a rules committee that looks after settlement rules and informs the PG. It's quite a straightforward structure. We don't have a lot of changes, and there isn't a lot of innovation and stuff that happens in that space besides the SAMOS rewrite and the new SAMOS features, but that only happens once in a couple of years. So the settlement space is quite a stable space, unlike the clearing space where there's a lot of things happening. So I think those structures they're very important. They are easier to manage. Thank you, Nix. And then lastly, but definitely not least, before I run out of time, we have our SME structures. As I said at the start, this is where we pull together subject matter experts from within the member organizations, each in their own field. We have a legal committee. We also have a legal stakeholder forum that is not as new as the high value one, but also a relatively new addition under, I think, Pia's guidance. And I believe there are good conversations happening in the stakeholder forum, but also getting some additional stakeholders in that forum. We have the competition committee, and then we have our NPS risk committee that pulls together bigger NPS risk issues not pertaining to or very specific to payment system issues. We have a BCP committee that I think we found quite valuable in times such as we've experienced recently. And then our standards advisory forum, who looks after standards that forms a key pillar of the payment system. Righty, so let me take a breath. I'm going to go through this quite quickly. It is self-explanatory. So stepping away from the structures and how we organize and get our members together, this is how we organize ourselves. And just starting from the 12 o'clock position. So we have our CEO, Gita, that everyone on this call is familiar with. And then we have executive members who look after these portfolios, but we have support services, and these functions should not be new, I think, to anyone in the corporate environment. They're pretty similar structures that we have in the companies that you run or that you're part of. But to demonstrate, we also have some of those and how we organize ourselves. So we have HR, finance, and IT. We didn't always have those dedicated functions. These days we do. Then we have payment system operations, and those are the guys who look after our PCHPGs and the running of those PCHPGs and all matters operational. Membership and compliance, Marie Smith on the line looks after, and that's where all the system operator authorization and all of those also sit. Pia looks after policy and regulation and legal, and Pia has a very capable team that helps him with that. We have quite a big project office that Marie Few, that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, looks after, with business analysts and project administrators and project managers. We also have a management information capability that looks after MI for the industry. Industry training and events I look after. So we have our training programs and our conferences that we do. Change and comms reports to Maurits, and they look after the change capability. So they work with the project office quite closely, and also comms. Our company secretariat is Helen Peace, and she looks after all things company governance-wise. Risk management is taken care of by Naniki, our Chief Risk Officer, with a team. And then our strategy and research reports into Maurits. That makes up the biggest portion of his portfolio, and everyone is familiar with Maurits. I'm going to cut it there because I think I went a couple of minutes over my time. My apologies, colleagues. And then I see there's a lot of questions. Thank you so much. We're going to get to those now. I'm going to ask Pia to run us through the focus areas quickly, and then we're going to get to those questions that haven't been answered in the chat. Thank you, Pia.
Thank you, Letitia. Yeah, I think they are good questions, and we should find a few minutes to respond to those questions. Hello?
Yes, so see, this body is like, you think you're in 1991.
Colleagues, could we just all mute? I hear voices. So, Nicolette, if you could run to the next slide. Good. So in PASA, we have a number of focus areas. As you can understand, there is a strategic view on the low value, and the question was, what is low value? Now there you will see, for instance, some of the payment systems that we do manage, or PCHs we manage in the low value. ADO and NADO have been closed now. We have debit check or AC in its place. There is an item limit. If we talk about debit orders, I think the debit order limit used to be 500,000 for a transaction that you can process through it, but now the limit is 1 million. Other limits, and we will talk about those. RTC's maximum amount that you can process in RTC is 5 million. So in essence, those electronic payment systems, they all have a limit, but if the limit is lower than 5 million, then that is low value. So there's a focus on the entire debit order ecology, and we describe it as such because we also talk about convergence, and you have a very effective EFT debit system, collection system. You had ADO and NADO. Now you have debit check. Then RPP is going to join next year sometime. And we have to look at this ecology as a whole, holistically, before you agree how to develop it, how to optimize it. Your rules will have to be consistent. Your rules have to speak the same language and ensure the same interpretation. If we look at high value, again, the value in high value is any value. Yeah, in fact, if you choose to process a transaction with a value lower than 5 million, you can do so in that PCH, but it's got its very specific and own rails. It's a real-time RTGS system between members, and they settle immediately. So there's also a focus on how to optimize and how to innovate in that environment. We have ISO 20022 together with the SAMOS enhancements. So these are projects currently being considered in PASA Council. We have PASA and PASA Council as the governing body. We have the QR code standardization. And look, I think this is, again, good innovation. It's fintechs joining the fray, and we have to look at their interests as well. We are currently looking at interoperability by introducing a standard without having an impact on those fintechs. So that is a challenge. It's going to be a challenge in the future, PIB as well. And then we look at card. Card, we have a number of PCHs. We have debit card, credit card, fleet, Amex, Diners, and you have to look at the card environment holistically, but you cannot ignore the other payment systems. So if you look at QR, you'll see QR could be playing out in the electronic environment, but in the card environment as well. So there is a holistic view with regards to all the payment systems that we manage and that we provide strategy for. Nicolette, next slide. Okay, that takes us to the questions and answers. So let's have hands and focus areas. I think the item limit was one question. There was a question by Palive with regards to the appointment, who appoints representatives to PASA structures. If you look at the PCHPGs, every signatory to a PCH agreement, every participant in that PCH is eligible for membership of that. So in terms of their constitution, if you are a participant, you are a member of that PCHPG, Payment Clearinghouse Participant Group, as the managing committee for that forum. If you look at SME committees, legal committees, we would establish a committee with the mandate from PASA Council delegated to them, and we would ask for appointments to that committee. Usually we say not less than so many members, but we are not prescriptive with regards to that. And then if we look at the strategy committees, we say every participant in a PCH under that strategy committee would be eligible for membership in that strategy committee. That's just generic principles that we apply. In fact, we open up, you have representation at the forum. And there was another question with regards to possibly, would PSOs, PCH system operators be involved? Would other parties be involved? Yes, you can be. What we have done in our constitutions, because the PCH system operator is so critical and core to that PCH, we have a standing invite to the PCH system operator. From time to time, we could invite other participants and parties to the discussions, but mainly if we engage outside and external, we would do so through our stakeholder forums. And again, anyone can participate in any of those stakeholder forums. Let me stop there. If there are questions, you can just raise your hand and any of the panel members can respond to the question.
Yeah, I think we have one unanswered question. I'm quickly trying. Thank you, Marie. You've been great at answering the questions on the chat. So colleagues, scroll through the chat if you want to see some of Marie's answers. If there are any other questions, like Pia says, put up your hand and then we can talk about those. I think there's one unanswered question, and that is from Christo, that's been asking about cryptocurrency, whether we have, Christo, let me just get to your question specifically. In fact, you had a question and a follow-up question, and you wanted to know, have there been clearing systems? Have any clearing systems been developed for virtual currencies and the regulation of blockchain payments? Not specifically at this point in time. Pia, do you want to respond to Christo?
Yeah, I think your answer is sufficient, Letitia.
Yeah, we haven't. So we haven't. If you want to chat to us about that, pop us a note, and then we're more than welcome. We'll be very happy to chat to you about why that is. Currently, there's only some papers that's been issued from the Intergovernmental FinTech Work Group. that gives a position on that.
There's another question I see from Zubin. Can a TPP choose to get registered without a bank recommending that it should be registered? Zubin, the big problem with TPP is it is a directive with almost a one-liner saying thou shalt be registered, and you report, and Marie, I thought you left the meeting. And you have to inform your bank, and your bank has to register you. And that's just about what it says. But currently the SARP is looking at it. Marie, you can respond to the second question from Zubin. His question is the following: what benefit does a bank get by getting a TPP registered with PASA?
So I've answered it in the chat, Zubin. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to ask about it. But we're happy to discuss. I think maybe just on Christo's question. So Christo, I think something we also need to maybe just bear in the back of our minds is that first of all, the term virtual currency is quite a loaded term to mean a lot of different things. And if we talk about domestic payments today, we talk about ZAR, South African Rand. So that's the first thing I think that's important. The second thing is that blockchain is a technology. So it's probably, if we think about a PCH governs a particular type of payment and possibly could be technology agnostic. So I think that's maybe two things I would like to make mention of, bear in the back of your mind. But like the colleagues have indicated, if you want to have these discussions, very happy to have them. Maybe Zubin, if I can hear from you, have I answered your question sufficiently?
Yeah, thanks, Marie and Pierre. I'm good.
Alrighty, I don't see any hands up. Colleagues, anything else, please just, put up your hand or put on your mic. We have a couple of minutes still to answer questions, and that's why we have our experts today, is to answer any questions that you may have. Also, we want to extend the invitation to say, if you have some questions that you think about after you've seen the presentation again and you've paged through it, please pop it through to Nicolette, and she'll send it to the correct person to answer those questions for you. We're very happy to engage on anything PASA related.
Letitia, I'll just give it the last attempt there for Christo. As you know, virtual currencies are not regarded as currencies by the Reserve Bank. It's an asset. They don't want to describe it as a currency. So do you make a payment in terms of our point of departure, and the payment systems always, do you transfer funds? Do you make a payment? If you do so, is it in cash or is it electronic? If we do it electronic with any two banks, that's the requirement. Any two banks exchanging a payment instruction or making payments between each other on behalf of clients, they will have to establish a PCH. Now, because this is not recognized by the SARP as value, we did not enter that space to say, okay, this is a payment or it's a transfer of funds. I think the SARP, as the regulator, will have to guide us there.
Very interesting topic. But again, Christo, if you want to talk a little bit more about it, please pop us a note, and then we'll direct you to the team who can talk to you about that a little bit more. Alrighty, I'm going to do one last call for any questions. Alrighty, I don't think there's anything else. Nicolette, pop that button once more so we can move off the screen. There we go. And with that, we say goodbye. Thank you very much for your time. And please be in touch. We hope to chat to you again. Thank you.